Welcome back to This is Thailand. Tonight's story is a little different from most of the ones we tell here, and I want you to keep that in mind as you listen, because I think it's the whole point. When you picture a man losing everything in Thailand, you picture a certain thing, don't you? You picture neon, you picture walking street at midnight, a bar girl in a numbered bikini, a 60-year-old bloke with a chang in his hand, and no idea what he's doing. That's the story everybody warns you about. That's the story on every forum, in every pub in Yamteen, in every YouTube comment section, including this one. The man you're about to hear from walked past all of that, eyes open, never went near it. He'd done his reading, he knew exactly what the trap looked like, and he built his whole life around not falling into it. His name is Bjørn Halvorsen. He's 61, he's from Bergen on the west coast of Norway, and he spent 34 years in the engine rooms of chemical tankers. A second engineer, a man who fixes things, a man who trusts numbers. He came to Chiang Mai with a plan, a pension, and about 2.1 million kroner in the bank. And what got him wasn't neon. It was a physiotherapy clinic with a laminated certificate on the wall and a woman who wouldn't take his money. I'm not going to tell you what happened. That's his to tell. But I'll say this. There's a line he uses near the end that I haven't been able to get out of my head since I first heard it. He said, "I checked the rebar. I never checked the paperwork." You'll understand what he means. And when you do, it's going to sit with you for a while. Here's his story in his own words. I should explain something about myself first, or none of the rest of it will make sense. I am an engineer, second engineer, chemical tankers, 34 years. And what that means is not what people think it means. People hear sailor, and they think of harbors and tattoos and a woman in every port. It was not that. It was a metal room below the waterline, 42 degrees, so loud you wore doubled ear defenders and still your teeth buzzed at the end of a watch. It was 4 hours on, 8 off for months. It was reading a vibration in a bearing and knowing in your hands before any gauge told you that something was going wrong. I was good at it. I want to say that once and then not say it again, because it becomes an excuse later. You learn two things at sea. The first is that machinery does not lie. A pump does not tell you it is fine when it is not fine. It shows you oil temperature, pressure differential, the sound. You listen, you look, you measure, you fix. Everything can be known. Everything has a cause. The second thing you learn is that you trust your crew completely. You have to. There is nobody else. When you go into a tank with a gas meter, the man on the line above you is holding your life in his hand, and you do not spend 1 second wondering whether he is trustworthy, because if you did, you could not do the job. So you decide once at the start of your career that people are what they appear to be, and then you never revisit it. 34 years, that worked for me. Ingrid, my wife, she was diagnosed at 51, early onset Parkinson's. I was in Singapore when she called. I remember I was standing on the quay at Yurong with the phone against my good ear, and there was a crane operator screaming at somebody in Malay, and I made her repeat it twice. Not because I didn't hear, because I heard. I came ashore at 52. It is the only thing I have ever quit. 9 years. People say caring for someone, like it is a soft thing, a hand-holding thing. It is not. It is physical work. It is lifting a grown woman out of a bath at 2 in the morning when her legs have decided that day that they belong to somebody else. It is learning which food she can swallow. It is the wheelchair ramp I built myself and rebuilt. Because the first one had a gradient I got wrong by 2 degrees and she went into the door frame. It is the slow subtraction. That's the only way I can put it. First the legs, then the hands, then the face. The face goes, it stops moving, and you cannot read her anymore. And the woman you married is still in there behind a door that will not open. The last 2 years, she could not speak. We had a board with letters. She spelled out one thing over and over near the end, and I will not tell you what it was. That one is mine. She died in the spring. March. And here is the thing I have to tell you. Because if I do not tell you this, you will not understand anything else. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief, which is what people expect you to say, and which I would have accepted. Nothing. A flat gray nothing, like the North Sea in November, when the sky and the water are the same color, and there is no horizon, and you cannot tell which way is up. I stood at her funeral in Korskirchen, and I did arithmetic. I am not proud of this. I stood there in a black suit, and I calculated the outstanding mortgage on the house, in the interest rate, and what I would get if I sold in the autumn versus the spring, and I did it over and over because it was the only room in my head that had a light on. My sister Kari came to me afterwards. She took my arm and she said, "You need to grieve, Björn." And I said, "There's nothing to grieve. I already did it. I did it for 9 years, a bit at a time, and now there's nothing left to do." She looked at me like I'd hit her. I think about that answer a lot. It was not true. It was not even close to true. But I did not know that yet. The house on Neustadt sold in 4 months. Good house. I'd redone the wiring, the plumbing, the roof, my hands, my work. Went for more than I expected, actually, and that turned out to be the worst luck of my life, though I couldn't know it then. After everything I had, about 2.1 million kroner sitting in the account, call it $200,000, and the Siemens pension on top, which is a decent pension, better than most. So, 60 years old, no wife, no ship, no mortgage, no reason to be anywhere, money in the bank and nothing to do at 8 in the morning. You don't understand what that does to a man until it happens to you. I had spent my entire adult life inside a schedule. The watch, the rounds, the checks. And then the 9 years, which was also a schedule. Meds at 7, physio at 10, lunch, the bath, the turning of her at night so she didn't get sores. My days had a shape, always for 40 years. And then one Tuesday I woke up in a rented flat in Bergen, and there was nothing. Nothing at all. And I lay there and I thought, I could stay here. I could just stay here in this bed, and nobody in the world would notice for about 9 days. That's what it was. It was not sadness. I want to be very clear about this, because people want the story where the sad widower goes looking for love. And that is not what happened. I did not want love. The idea would have made me laugh. I wanted 8 o'clock in the morning. I wanted something to check. Terje found me. Old shipmate. We were on the Beau Cecile together in the 90s. He was chief when I was third. He'd retired to Chiang Mai 4 years before, married a Thai woman, seemed happy in a way I found slightly suspicious. He sent me a photograph on Facebook. That's all it was. A photograph. A cup of coffee on a balcony rail, and behind it some green hills going soft in the morning haze, and one of those gray concrete power poles with about 40 cables coming off it, which I noticed because that is the kind of thing I notice. Underneath he wrote, "Bad wiring, good coffee. Come." I looked at that picture for a long time, and I want to be honest about what I saw because it wasn't paradise. I've been to Thailand, Lam Chabang, map to foot. I'd been in and out of those ports for 20 years, and I could tell you the draft at each berth and nothing else about the country at all. That is how a sailor knows a place. Barely. What I saw in that photograph was a balcony where a man drinks a coffee at a certain time. A schedule. A morning with a shape. I booked the flight that night. 61 years old, and I packed one bag because when you've lived out of a sea bag for 34 years, you don't own very much, and you don't think you need very much. I told Carrie I'd be gone 3 months. The first thing I noticed about Chiang Mai was the wiring. I know how that sounds. Man lands in Southeast Asia after a lifetime of gray water and gray sky, steps out of the terminal into 34 degrees, and air like a warm, wet towel over the face, and what does he look at? The power poles. But that's what I am. There were 40, 50 cables on every pole, spliced and respliced, hanging in loops like somebody had knitted them, and I stood on the pavement outside arrivals with my one bag, and I thought, that should not work. And it works. It has worked for 30 years, and it will work for 30 more. And there is a lesson in that which I did not learn. I looked at the drainage too, the clongs, the concrete channels. I looked at the tuk-tuk engines when they idled at the lights, listened to them the way you listen to a genset, and about half of them were burning oil, and the drivers didn't care. It rained the second evening. Proper rain, the kind that comes down like somebody emptied a tank. And I watched a whole street turn into a river and drain away in 11 minutes. I timed it. Of course I timed it. I took a serviced apartment in Sanitham, north of the old city. 18,000 baht a month, about 5,500 kroner. 2 rooms, a balcony, an air conditioner that rattled. A 7-Eleven at the end of the Sowai with a doorbell chime that I heard in my sleep for 2 years. And within a week I had a schedule. God help me, I had a schedule. Up at 6. Market at 7. The small one off Chungpuak, not the tourist one. And I would buy fruit I couldn't name and learn the names. Coffee at 8, at a place with 3 tables, run by a boy with a tattoo of a fish. Walk, read, lunch at a shop house where the woman knew after 4 days that I would have cow soy and never asked. Home in the heat. Nap. Evening walk. Bed at 10. I told myself that was contentment. It was not contentment. It was a man running a ship with no cargo, no crew and nowhere to go, doing the rounds anyway, checking gauges on machines that were not connected to anything. But I did not know that, and the rounds felt good, and my shoulder hurt. Terje took me into the expat thing. That's a whole world, and I want to describe it honestly, because those men saved me and doomed me in the same evening. There's an Irish pub near the moat with a quiz on Sundays, and a table of men in their 60s and 70s who have been sitting at more or less that same table for 15 years. Chung and Leo sweating glasses, the fan going. And they talk, my God, they talk. I sat and I listened, like I would listen to a machine that is about to fail. That's what it sounded like to me. Bearing noise. There was a Scotsman, Alan, I think, who had lost a condo in Yomtien. Put it in her name, the girl left, that was that. There was an Englishman who had been paying school fees for 4 years for children that turned out to be her sisters. There was a Dutchman who did the sick buffalo joke, which if you don't know it, is a joke about how the girlfriend always needs money because the family buffalo is sick, and he told it 3 times in one evening and laughed harder each time. And by the 3rd time, nobody else was laughing, and he didn't notice. Terje said to me on the way out, very serious, hand on my arm, Björn, the bars, do not go in the bars. Whatever you do here, do not fall in love with a girl from a bar. And I took that in. I took all of it in. I went home and, this is true, and it is the most embarrassing thing I will tell you tonight. I made notes on my laptop, a list. I built a model. That's what an engineer does. You take the failure reports and you find the common cause. And every single failure in that pub had one input, the bar. Neon, beer, a girl on a stool, a bar fine, a man who should have known better. So I designed my defense around that one shape. One shape. I did not go into a single bar in Chiang Mai in 2 years. Not one. I was proud of it. I was proud of it the way you're proud of a clean engine room. You can see it coming, can't you? From where you're sitting, you can see it. Everybody can see it except the man in the story. Now, the shoulder. 9 years of lifting Ingrid, in and out of the bath, in and out of the chair, twice a night some nights, had destroyed my right rotator cuff. I had ignored it, the way you ignore a knocking sound when you have no time to strip the unit. But in Thailand, with nothing to do, the pain came forward and stood in front of me. I couldn't lift my arm above shoulder height, couldn't sleep on that side, couldn't reach the top shelf of the fridge. Terje's wife, Mei Li, told me to stop being an idiot and go to a proper place. Not one of the massage shops off the tourist streets, she said. A real one. She wrote the address in my phone. A physiotherapy and massage shop in a soy off of Nimmenhemen, behind the Maya Mall. You'd walk past it, you would honestly walk past it. A narrow shop front squeezed between a print shop and a place selling phone cases. I went on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd eaten a banana roti from the cart on the corner and got condensed milk on my shirt, and I was annoyed about it. And I did what I always do. I inspected the place. Clean. Not tourist clean, actually clean. The floor, the corners, the underside of the treatment beds. The linens changed in front of me. A ventilation unit that had been serviced, and you can tell, you can always tell. On the wall framed, a laminated certificate in Thai and English from a physiotherapy program in Khon Kaen, and next to it a license from the health ministry with a date on it that had not expired. An appointment book on the counter, not for show. Actually used, actually full, with corrections in 2 colors of pen. And I thought, And I mean this exactly as I say it. This is a well-run system. The owner came out, Pranay. Everybody called her Nok, which means bird, and Thai people mostly go by these nicknames. It took me a while to understand that. 38. From Roy Et, out in Isan, in the northeast. Short, strong forearms, hair pulled back, no makeup at all that I could see. She did not smile at me the way the girls in the shop smile at Farangs. She looked at how I was standing, and then she pointed at my right shoulder before I said a word. She got me on the table, and she was not gentle. She put a thumb into a spot under the shoulder blade, and I made a noise I have not made since I was a child. Then she said, "You lift somebody. Long time." "Yes?" I said nothing for a bit. She said, "Heavy? Every day?" And I said, "Yes. My wife." Her hand stopped. She said, "Your wife is sick?" I said, "She died." And Nok said, quietly, still standing behind me where I couldn't see her, "How long you take care of her?" 9 years, I said. And she said, 9 years. Nobody help you? You have to understand something. My sister asked me if I was eating. My neighbors asked me if I was managing. The doctor asked me about my sleep. The whole of Bergen asked me how I was doing, and every single one of them meant it kindly, and not one of them ever asked me about her. Nobody had said Ingrid's name to me in 9 years, not since the diagnosis. People stop saying the name. They think it's a kindness. I lay there on that table, face down in the hole, 61 years old, and I could not answer her. I couldn't. Something came up out of the floor of me, and I could not get a word past it. And I lay there in a shop house in Nimmen, with a stranger's hands on my back, and the traffic going by outside, and a rooster somewhere, a rooster in the middle of a city, and I did not move and I did not speak. She didn't say anything either. She just carried on working. And after a while, she moved down to my forearm and told me my grip was too tight, that I was holding on to things with the wrong muscles, and that this was a very old habit and would take a long time to fix. At the counter afterwards, I booked 10 more sessions. Paid up front, 3,500 baht, about 1,100 kroner. For the shoulder, that's what I told myself, standing there while she wrote my name in the book in Thai letters. For the shoulder. 10 sessions became 20. 20 became a habit, and a habit, if you are me, becomes a schedule, and a schedule becomes a life. I want to be very careful here, because this is the part where people stop listening. This is where you decide I was a stupid old man, and maybe I was. But if you skip this part, you will not understand how it happened. And if you don't understand how it happened, then it can happen to you. So, let me tell you about Nok's business, because that's what I fell in love with first. I'm not being clever. I mean it. She had that shop for 6 years, 2 treatment rooms, 4 beds. She employed 2 girls, Fawn and Bee, and she trained them herself, and she was hard on them. I saw her make Bee redo a shoulder sequence 3 times because the pressure was wrong. She had a supplier for the oils, and she argued with him about the price, on the phone, in front of me, for 11 minutes. Her rent was 25,000 baht a month, about 8,000 kroner. And the landlord raised it that first year, and she complained about it constantly. Constantly. She'd sit there with a bowl of cow soy and go on about that man's greed until her food went cold. 6 days a week she worked, closed Sundays, and on Sundays she called her son, T, 9 years old. In the village, in Roy Et, out in Isan, living with her mother while she worked in the city and sent money home, which is what half the country does and which nobody in Europe understands until you see it. She'd sit on the balcony of my flat in Sanatham with the phone up and talk to him for an hour, and I'd hear this little voice and her laughing, and afterwards she'd be quiet for a while. She told me about the husband once. Early on, maybe the 3rd or 4th time we ate together, a som-tom place near the shop, plastic stools, the mortar going pock, pock, pock behind us. So hot my eyes ran. She said, "I have son. I was married. He go away." That was it. That was the whole conversation. And I didn't ask. I have never in my life asked a man about his divorce, or his debts, or why he came to sea. You don't. On a ship, you take a man as he stands in front of you, and you don't dig into what's behind him, because everybody's got something behind them, and the digging doesn't help you get the job done. She said he went away. So he went away. Case closed in my head in about 4 seconds, and I never opened it again for 2 years. I think about that a lot now. What we had was, and I know how this sounds, it was boring. It was lovely, and it was boring. We went up Doi Suthep on our motorbike, me on the back like a great sack of Norwegian potatoes, and I made her stop halfway so I could look at the engine, because it was pinking on the climb, and I didn't like the sound of it. She teased me about that for a year. She taught me to eat. That's the honest truth. I'd been eating in a way you eat when you're a widower, standing up, out of packets, whatever's nearest. She would put things in front of me and watch until I ate them. Larb, mooping off the cart, sticky rice you take with your fingers. She got very cross when I put a fork in my mouth, because you don't. The fork is for pushing, the spoon is for eating, and I have never got that wrong since. And then the air conditioner. The compressor unit on the back of her shop was failing. She'd had a man in twice, and he'd taken her money twice, and it still cut out every afternoon at 3. So I went and had a look at it. Took the housing off. It was, well, it doesn't matter what it was. A bad capacitor and a fan bearing that hadn't been greased since the Bhumibol era. I went to a shop on Changpuak, bought the parts for maybe 900 baht, and I had it running by 4 in the afternoon. I was filthy. My hands were black. B brought me a chang, and I sat on an upturned crate in a back alley in Niman with the smell of hot tarmac and drains and somebody frying garlic upstairs. And my shoulder was screaming, and I thought, that is the best day I have had in 11 years. 11 years, do you understand? I was useful to a system. That was working, and it needed me, and I fixed it, and it stayed fixed. I did not know it at the time, but that is the whole story. Everything after that is just that same feeling. Getting more expensive. Now, the money. Twice in the first 4 months I offered her money. Twice. The first time was small. Her electricity bill had come, and it was stupid, some error. 12,000 baht. And she was furious, and I said, look, let me just pay it. It's nothing. She looked at me like I'd spat on the floor. She said, why you say this? I tried to explain. She wouldn't have it. She paid the bill herself, and she was cold with me for a day. The second time was worse. I wanted to take her to Krabi for a few days, and I said I'd pay for everything. And she said no, and I pushed it. I said something like, come on, I have it. You don't. And I watched her face close like a hatch. She didn't speak to me for 2 days. 2 days. Wouldn't answer line. I went to the shop, and Fawn told me she was busy, which she wasn't. And when we finally sorted it out, she said this to me, and I can still hear it exactly. I don't want your money. I want you to be here. I want you to understand what that did to me, because it did not make me feel loved. That's not what happened. It made me feel safe, because I had a model, you see. I'd built it in that Irish pub. Every disaster those men described started with a woman who wanted money. Every one. That was the input. That was the failure mode. And here was a woman who not only didn't want it, she was insulted by it twice. And one of those times she went silent for 2 days over it, which is not the behavior of somebody running a game. I had tested the system. That's genuinely how I thought about it. I applied a load, and the system responded correctly, and I logged the result. And then I was smug about it. That's the part 1 in 1,000 ashamed of. I sat in that pub on a Sunday, listening to the Dutchman do his buffalo joke for the 400th time, and I felt sorry for them. These poor, bitter fools, I thought. You went to the bars. You went to the bars, and you got what you went for. And now you sit here and blame a whole country. I had a woman with a business and a license, and a son and a landlord she hated. I was not in that story. I sit here now and I hear myself saying that, and I want to reach back and put my hands around my own throat. Somewhere in there, month 3, month 4, I slept through the night. I don't know how to explain this to someone who hasn't done 9 years of it. Your body doesn't forget. 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, the ears listening for the sound of her breathing changing, for the thump, for the small noise of her trying not to wake you. Even after she was gone, even in an empty flat in Bergen, I woke at 2 and at 4 every night for 8 months. And one morning in that apartment in Sanitham, The light came up and the roosters were going and the 7-Eleven chime was going, and I opened my eyes and it was 10 past 6, and I had not woken once. I lay there, and I did not move for a long time. Month 5, the rent went up again, and one of the beds broke, the hydraulic on the good one, and it was going to be about 40,000 baht to replace it properly. I insisted. This time I insisted. We argued for a week. In the end, we made a deal, and it was my deal, and I was proud of it. I would put in 20,000 baht a month, about 6,500 kroner, and it was not for her, it was for the shop. Not an allowance, an investment in the business. I was very firm about the distinction. And then, God help me, I made a spreadsheet. I did, a proper one. Columns for the rent, the oils, the girls' wages, the electricity, projected income at 6 clients a day versus 8. I brought my laptop to the shop and I turned it round on the counter and I showed her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she laughed. Really laughed. Head back, hand over her mouth the way Thai women do. She said, "You are crazy, man." And she kissed me on the head and she went back to work. And I sat there with my spreadsheet feeling like the cleverest man in Southeast Asia. Month 6, she took me to Royat. You go by bus or you fly to Khon Kaen and drive the last hour and a half, which is what we did, in a hired car, past sugar cane and cassava, and those flat brown fields that go all the way to the edge of the world. Isan is not the Thailand on the postcards. No mountains, no sea, dust, dogs, spirit houses outside every gate with a little glass of red Fanta going warm in the sun for the spirits, which I thought was a joke until Nok told me, quite seriously, that they prefer it. Her mother's house was wood, old wood, up on posts, tin roof. The board's gone soft at one corner where the water came in. There was a rice mill under the house and a dog with 3 legs and about 40 people in the yard. 40. I counted later because I count things. And here's the thing I got wrong. They put me at the head of the mat. The oldest aunt made way for me. The conversation stopped when I came in and started again quieter. The food came to me first. Sticky rice, som tam, a fish, a bowl of larb so hot I could not breathe, and everybody waited while I ate. Children were brought to weigh me, hands together, heads down, and pushed forward and giggled. And I sat there in that warm noise with the smell of charcoal and fish sauce and dust. And I thought, they like me. They did like me. That's the part nobody tells you. They did. But that is not what I was watching. What I was watching was a family that had never had a farang in the yard before, and now had one, and every person in that village would know by nightfall. In Isayan, a foreigner at the table is not just a man. He is a fact about your family's position. He is status. Both of those things were true at the same time, the liking and the lifting. And in Europe, we do not have a mental drawer for 2 things like that being true at once. So we pick one, and I picked the wrong one, and I picked it happily. Somjit, the mother, 68, no English at all. She took my hand in both of hers and said something long, and Knox said, "She says thank you for coming," and I did not believe for 1 second that was the whole sentence. T, the boy, 9. He hid behind his grandmother for 2 hours, and then he found me under the house, looking at the water pump, and after that I could not get rid of him. Nobody mentioned his father. Not that day, not ever. Not one time in 2 years in that house did anybody speak that man's name. I noticed. I want to be honest with you. I noticed, and I filed it exactly where you would file it. A man walked out on a woman and a baby, and there is nothing to say about a man like that, and the family's silence is shame, and you leave it alone. I was half right. It was shame. It was the wrong shame. The water pump. God, the water pump. It had been dead for 2 years, and they were carrying water in buckets from a neighbor's tap. Foot valve gone, impeller full of grit, and somebody had wired it with a piece of flex that would have got a man killed within the year. I fixed it in a morning. Then I did the rice mill motor, which took 3 days and a trip to Royat town for a bearing. And T came with me on the bus and asked me the Norwegian word for everything he could see out of the window. And I want to tell you something I have not said out loud before. When Ingrid was ill, nothing I did worked. Do you understand that? For 9 years, I got up every day and applied myself to a problem that could not be solved. Every single thing I did, the ramp, The lifts, the physio, the trips to Haukeland, the diet, the exercises, the second opinion. Every single thing failed because the disease does not care about your competence. 9 years of maintenance on a machine that was designed to fail. And then I was under a house in a sand with grit in my eyes and a spanner in my hand. And I fixed the pump, and water came out of the tap, and a boy shouted, "That is the engine. Everything that comes next, every stupid thing, that's the engine. Not love, not sex, not some old man's fantasy. It was being needed by a body again, and having the body get better." Month 9, Samjit's foot. She'd had the diabetes for years and never really managed it, which is normal there. You take the pills when you can afford them. There was an ulcer under the ball of her right foot that she had hidden from everybody, including her daughter, for months because she did not want to be trouble. When Nock finally saw it, it was black at the edges and the smell was in the room. The government hospital in Royet was full. That's not a criticism, it's just true. It's free and it's full and there is a queue. They could see her in 9 days. 9 days. With that, we drove her to a private hospital in Concaine that night, 90 minutes with the window down because of the smell, and Nock holding her mother's hands and talking to her the whole way in a voice I'd never heard her use. Debridement, then a partial amputation of the second toe, then 11 days of IV antibiotics, then the wound care, then the follow-up. 180,000 baht, about 58,000 kroner. $16,000 if you like. No, that's wrong. About 5,000 US. $5,000. Sorry, my arithmetic goes when I talk about this. And here is what I need you to understand. I did not decide anything. There was no moment. I did not sit in a corridor and weigh it up. Somebody put a form in front of me at a counter in the middle of the night and I paid. The way you'd throw a line to a man in the water. There was no thought in it at all. If there had been a thought in it, I might have had a chance. They saved the foot. She walks on it now. Nock cried in the corridor afterwards, properly folded up with her forehead on my chest. And she said over and over, "Now you are family. Now you are family." And I heard love. I did hear love. I still think it was love. It was also a contract. Both, always both. And I had signed it standing at a payment counter at 2 in the morning without reading a single line. 3 things happened in the weeks after that. I'll list them because that's how they sit in my head now, in a row, all lined up, all ignored. 1. An aunt, Pim, the loud one, asked something across the yard, laughing, and Nock's whole body changed. She turned and she went for that woman in Izon dialect, fast and low and vicious. And the yard went quiet, and Pim looked at her feet. I asked what it was. Nock said, "She asked, 'Will you build house for my mother?'" She was shaking. She apologized to me for an hour. She said, "I never ask you this, never, you understand? Never." And I was impressed. That's the truth. I sat there feeling reassured by her fury. I did not notice the only thing that mattered, which is that the question had been asked, out loud, in front of everyone. And questions like that, once they're in the air, do not go away. They just wait. 2. I was starting to look at the visa business. A marriage visa needs 400,000 baht in a Thai account, or 40,000 a month coming in, and it's a whole thing, and I like paperwork. So I began reading about it, and I said to Nock casually over dinner, "I will need your divorce certificate for the file." She said, "Thailand paper. Very slow, very boring." And she got up to get more rice. That's it. That's the whole moment. 8 seconds maybe. She got up to get more rice and I let her, and I did not ask again for 11 months. 3. I called Carrie, my sister, in Bergen. I'd been telling her the good version for months. The shop, the shoulder, the village, the boy. And she listened. And then she said, in that flat Bergen way she has, "Björn, have you met the ex-husband?" And I said no. She said, "Have you seen any papers? Anything? Björn, have you seen a single piece of paper?" And I said, "And I am not proud of this, and I have apologized for it since, and she has been better about it than I deserve." I said, "Not everybody is a thief, Carrie. Some people just have a hard life. You wouldn't know." And I hung up on her. We did not speak for a year. Nobody asked me to build that house. I need you to hear that properly, because when I tell this story in a bar, somebody always jumps in. Ah, they got you. They always get you. The house, the house. They all want the house. And it's not true. Not in my case. It was my idea. I proposed it. I pushed it. And when she said no, I kept pushing until she said yes. Here's how it came about, and you can judge me. Month 11, rainy season. I'm at Samjit's place with a torch in my teeth, up in the roof space, because the tin was coming away at the ridge, and there was water running down the inside of the wall by the stairs. And the timbers up there, they were gone, rotten through. You could put a screwdriver into a purlin up to the handle. The whole back corner of that house was standing up out of habit. And she was 68, with 1.5 feet, going up and down a set of wooden stairs that moved when you stood on them. I came down and I sat on the step and I said to Knock, "This house will fall down." "Not maybe, it will." She said, "I know." She'd known for years. They all knew. There was no money, so it was simply a thing they lived inside of, like weather. I said, "I'll build her a new one." And Knock said no. She said no for 3 weeks, and she was not being coy. She was angry about it. She said, "Pim ask you this," and I tell her never, and now you say it, and everybody will say I make you. She said, "Everybody in village will say Knock get Farang. Farang build house, you understand?" Everybody will say it. And I said, I actually said this, God help me. Let them say it. I don't care what a village says. Which is the single most Farang sentence ever spoken. Because she cared. Of course she cared. Face is not vanity there. Face is the thing that lets you buy rice on credit when the money's late. And I sat in front of a woman explaining to her that her own currency was worthless. 3 weeks. Then one night she cried and said yes. And here's what I did with my due diligence, my careful engineer's due diligence. And I want you to listen closely because this is the whole thing. I researched the law. I did. I sat with my laptop and I read about it for a fortnight. Foreigners cannot own land in Thailand. Not through a nominee company, not through a clever structure, not really. If you build on Thai land, the land is Thai, and the house on it is more or less the land's. The shanote, that's the title deed, would be in her name. Her name, Pranny, and nothing I could do about it. I knew that. I knew it cold. I could have given a lecture on it, and I thought that knowing it was the same as protecting myself. Do you see? I identified the hazard. I read the manual, and then I walked straight into it, because I had confused understanding a risk with doing something about it. I never once asked the next question. Not once. Whose name is on the deed? Yes, hers. Fine, that's the law. But who is she? Legally, what is her status? Is there anybody else in the world with a claim on anything with her name on it? I never asked. It never entered my head. I had a woman who wouldn't take my money, remember? I'd tested that. Logged the result. The build. 1.1 million baht. 360,000 kroner. About $31,000 in your money. 3 bedrooms, single story. No stairs, that was the point. That was the whole design brief. No stairs for a woman with a bad foot. Concrete post and beam, block infill, tile roof, a proper septic system, a ramp at the front door, and I built that ramp with a gradient of exactly 1 in 12. And I checked it with a level, and I did not think about why I knew that number off by heart. Month 14 through month 17, I was on that site every day at 8 in the morning. Every day. And I'll tell you something that will make me sound like a madman. Those were the best months of my life since 2012. Not a joke, not a figure of speech. Since Ingrid got sick, that was the happiest I had been. Because I was a second engineer again. I had a job, a schedule, a crew, a budget, and a set of tolerances. I was up at 6. I was on site with a flask of coffee before the men arrived. I stood there in that dust and that heat with my shirt stuck to my back, and I checked things. I checked the rebar. God, I checked the rebar. The foreman brought in 6 millimeters for the ring beam when the drawing said 9, and I made him take it away. There was a cement delivery in month 15. bags that had been sitting somewhere wet, gone hard at the corners, and I stood in front of the truck and would not let them unload it. And there was a lot of shouting and a lot of face being lost, and Knock had to smooth it over for a week afterwards. But that cement went back. And the house is straight and it's square, and it'll be standing in 80 years. I was so proud of myself. Month 17, the housewarming. They call it a Kun Ban Mai. 9 monks in the morning, sitting in a row in the empty front room, chanting, and the white string running from their hands round the whole house, and the smell of the incense, and everybody sitting on the floor with their feet pointed away, which took me about 6 months to stop getting wrong. Then food all day. Then Hong Thong and Leo in the yard until midnight, and a cousin of hers got drunk. Big lad drove a truck. I never learned his name properly. He came over to where I was sitting, and he was laughing, and he said something in Thai, quite loud, maybe 7 or 8 words, and he was pointing at the house and then at me, and the yard went silent. Not quiet, silent. 40 people, and a radio playing somewhere, and nobody spoke. I looked at Knock, and her face was, I've never seen a face do that. All the blood went out of it. She stood up, and 2 men had that cousin by the arms, and he was walked out of the gate still laughing, and the gate was closed, and then everything started again. The radio, the talking. Somebody laughed too loudly. Within a minute, it was as if it hadn't happened. I asked her that night, in bed, what did he say? And she said, he make a joke about Farang. Very rude, not nice. Ignore him, he is stupid man, he always drink. And I said, all right, that's what I said. All right. I sat and I watched an entire family close ranks around a secret, in front of my eyes in perfect coordination, and I could not read a single thing on the instrument panel. That's what Kreng Jai does to you when you can't see it. It's not lying exactly. It's a whole society deciding, in the space of about 2 seconds, that a thing will not be said, and every one of them knows the play, and you're the only man on the pitch who doesn't know there's a game on. Month 20, I proposed, not romantically, I'm not built for that. I said we should get married, and she cried, and she said yes, and then she said, you are sure? 3 times she asked me that. You are sure? I thought she was being humble. Then came the engagement, and the engagement was enormous, and I want to give you the numbers because that's what you came for. Sin Sod, 300,000 baht, about 98,000 kroner. Now, Sin Sod is real. It's not a scam, whatever the pub will tell you. It's the bride price, it's tradition, it goes to the family, and often enough it comes back to the couple. And 300,000 for a woman of 38 with a son is not outrageous. It was on the high side. I could have negotiated. I didn't. Because negotiating over the value of a woman in front of her mother felt filthy to me. And because, let's be honest, I wanted them to see that she'd got a good one. Vanity. That was 300,000 baht of vanity. A pickup for the family. Second-hand Isuzu, 10 years old, 180,000 baht. So Somjit could get to the hospital in Khon Kaen for her follow-ups. That one I'd do again tomorrow. And the party, 200 people, a stage, a sound system that could have been heard in Laos, a woman singing More Lam until 2 in the morning, food for everybody, whiskey for everybody. About 150,000 baht by the time it was done. So, let me total it up the way I did later, in a hotel room. The shop, 20,000 a month for 15 months. The hospital, the house, the sinsod, the truck, the party. Odds and ends, the bearing for the rice mill. The school fees I'd quietly started paying for tea. Roughly 1.9 million baht, 620,000 kroner, $60,000. A third of everything I had in the world. A third of Ingrid's house. Here's the bit I've told nobody. At that party at about 11 at night, I was standing at the edge of the yard with a glass of Hong Thong that somebody kept filling. And there was the music and the lights strung up in the tamarind tree, and 200 people whose names I did not know, laughing. And it came back. The gray. The flat gray nothing. The North Sea in November. Out of nowhere. Standing in 30-degree heat at my own engagement party. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. And then T ran past and grabbed my leg and shouted something, and it went, and I put my glass down, and I decided, Properly decided the way you decide not to open a hatch, that I would not think about that again. We set the date for the Amphi office in Royette, 6 weeks out, a Tuesday. I put a reminder in my phone. The Ampho office in Royette is a low concrete building, the color of weak tea, with a car park out front and a mango tree at one end that somebody had painted white around the base. Inside, fluorescent tubes, one of them flickering. Plastic chairs bolted together in rows. A ticket machine. An air conditioning unit above the door that was dripping into a bucket. And I looked at it for a while and thought, that's a blocked condensate drain. That's 20 minutes work. And I actually considered offering. That's the man I was, walking in there. A man thinking about somebody else's air conditioner. I had my documents in a plastic wallet, alphabetized. Of course they were. The affirmation of freedom to marry from the Norwegian embassy in Bangkok. That's the paper that says you are legally able to be married, that there is no wife waiting for you somewhere. I'd gone down to Bangkok for it. Then the translation into Thai by a certified translator. Then the legalization stamp from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at Chengwatana, which took 2 trips and a whole day of sitting on another set of plastic chairs. Passport. Copies of passport, signed. Death certificate for Ingrid. Translated, legalized. Divorce, no. Widower. That word in Thai, which I had learned specifically so I could say it correctly to a clerk. I had done my part perfectly. That is not pride. That is the point of the story. Ticket 47. We waited about 40 minutes. Knock was quiet. She'd been quiet in the car, and quiet the night before, and I'd put it down to nerves because I was nervous too, and because I'd never once in 2 years had cause to think that her being quiet meant anything other than that she was tired. She was wearing a green blouse. I'd never seen it before. I remember thinking, she bought that for today. Our number came up. We sat down at the desk. The clerk was a woman of maybe 50, with reading glasses on a chain and a rubber thumb tip for counting paper, and she was perfectly pleasant. And she went through my folder page by page, and everything was in order. Then she turned to Knock and asked her something and put out her hand, and Knock didn't move. The clerk asked again, a little slower, and I heard the word. I didn't know much Thai, but I knew the shape of certain words by then, and one of them was the word for divorce, because I had been saying it and hearing it and thinking about it for a year without ever once seeing the piece of paper. Knock said something very quietly, 3 or 4 words. The clerk stopped. She looked at Knock. Then she looked at me. Then she pulled her keyboard over and typed for a while and looked at her screen, and she was not pleasant anymore. She was careful, which is worse. She said in English to me, "Sir, she cannot marry." I said, "Sorry?" She said, "She has husband. She is married, still married, cannot register. Now, here is what I want you to understand about me, and I suppose about men like me. I did not shout. I have never shouted in my life. On a ship, if you shout, you're already dead." I sat there, and I said, quite politely, I think, "Could you please say that again?" And she said it again. There was a husband, Somchai, T's father, married to her since she was 29. They had separated 7 years ago. She had taken the boy and gone, and she had never filed for divorce, and he had never filed for divorce. And so in the eyes of the Kingdom of Thailand, that woman sitting 18 inches from me in a green blouse was, and had been the whole time, another man's wife. He lived 40 kilometers away. 40. In another village in the same province. I had driven past the turning for it probably 100 times, and I sat in that plastic chair under that flickering tube, and I did what I do. I said, "Whose name is on the chenote?" The clerk didn't understand. Knock did. Knock understood perfectly, because here's the arithmetic, and it took me, I'd say 4 seconds. It was not a long calculation. It's a very short one. Land in Thailand can only be owned by a Thai. Fine. Correct. I knew that. The land under Somjit's new house is in Knock's name, because that is the only way it can be done. And I read about it, and I was proud of myself. Property acquired during a marriage in Thailand is marital property. Sin Somros. Both spouses. Knock is married. Therefore, a man named Somchai, whom I have never met, who lives 40 kilometers away, who I did not know existed until 11 seconds ago, has a legal interest in the land that I put 1.1 million baht of concrete on. That's it. That's the whole calculation. 4 seconds. I stood up and I said thank you to the clerk. I actually thanked her, and I'm glad I did. None of it was her fault. And I walked out into the car park, and I stood by the hire car in about 38 degrees of heat with the plastic wallet still in my hand. Knock came out after me. And this is the part that people don't want to hear because it doesn't fit. She did not deny it. She did not lie. She did not do any of the things I have heard men in that Irish pub describe. She didn't spin it. She didn't get angry. She didn't say I was crazy. She sat down on the curb, in her new green blouse, in the dirt, in the car park of a government office, and she cried in a way I have never seen a person cry. Not performing, not looking up to see if I was watching. She had her arms round her own head, and she said over and over this word, shame, shame. She said it badly, the way you say a word you've looked up but never used. Shami. I stood there. I did not comfort her. I want to be honest with you about that too. I stood there and I looked at the mango tree and I let her cry. Eventually she said this, and I have not been able to get rid of it since. If I tell you, you go. If I don't tell you, you stay. Every day I choose wrong. Every day, 2 years, I choose wrong. And she said she was going to fix it, that she tried twice, that she'd gone to him, that he wanted money, that he wanted the boy's name, that he was drunk, that his family said no, that it would mean everybody in 2 villages knowing that Prani's marriage had failed and that she had run, and that her mother, had begged her not to open it up again. And I said the thing I regret most in my life, more than the money, more than any of it. I said, I would have paid for the divorce. You only had to ask. Do you hear what I did? Do you hear it? She had just told me she was crushed between 2 impossible things for 2 years. And my answer, from the great engineer, the great fixer, was to reduce it to an invoice, to tell her that the one thing she could not bear to say out loud had a price, and that I'd have covered it, and that therefore her silence was stupid. I turned her whole life into a line item, in a car park. She stopped crying after that. That's the thing. She just stopped and stood up and got in the car, and we drove back in silence. I called Somjit 3 days later, with a friend of Terrier's translating on the phone. I asked her, did you know? And that old woman, whose foot I paid for, who cannot walk without the ramp I built to a gradient of 1 in 12, said quite simply that she had assumed I knew, that surely Knock had told me long ago, that in a family these things are known. And here is the terrible part. One believed her. I still believe her. I think she genuinely thought I knew, because in that world you do not sit a man down and announce a thing like that. You let him understand it over time, from the shape of what is not said, from the fact that nobody speaks a man's name in a house, from a drunk cousin at a housewarming who says the quiet part out loud and gets walked out of the gate. They thought they were telling me. For 2 years in their language, they were telling me constantly, and I was standing there with a spirit level, checking the rebar. There was no crime. That's what the lawyer said later. No fraud I could prove because I could not prove she'd intended it. Nobody had asked me for the house. Nobody had asked me for the sin sod. Every single baht had gone out of my hand because I put it there. Just a wall of things that were never said, brick by brick, none of them heavy on their own, and every one of them with my name on the invoice. I went to a hotel in Khon Kaen, and I stayed there for 9 days. Not a nice hotel. One of those business places near the ring road with a lift that groans and a breakfast buffet nobody eats. I turned my phone off on the second day. 50-something missed calls by the end. Line messages coming in from her, from Fawn at the shop, from Teria, from a number I didn't know that turned out to be one of the aunts. I didn't drink. People expect that part. One didn't. I lay on a bed in a cold room with the air conditioning roaring, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with pain, which is arithmetic. I got a notepad from reception and I wrote it all out. The shop, 20,000 a month, 15 months, 300,000 baht. Somjit's foot in the aftercare, 180,000. The house, 100,000. Sin sod, 300,000. The pickup, $180,000. The engagement party, about $150,000. School fees for tea, the bearing for the rice mill, the flights, the bus tickets, the hospital follow-ups, the fridge I bought them, all the small things. Call it 90,000. Total, a bit over 2.2 million baht on the pad, and I sat there and I argued with myself about which of it counted, because some of it I'd have spent anyway. And in the end, I settled on a figure of about 1.9 million. 620,000 kroner. $60,000 more or less. A third of what Ingrid's house sold for. I want to be very careful with you here, because this is where a man in my position usually starts to lie. I was not ruined. I am not ruined. I had about 1.4 million kroner left and a merchant seaman's pension that pays me every month whether I get out of bed or not. If I had wanted to, I could have stayed in Thailand on that money for the rest of my life. The retirement visa needs 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai account, and I had it several times over. So when you hear men tell these stories and they say she took everything, she left me with nothing. Some of them it's true, some of them it isn't, and they say it anyway because $60,000 and a broken heart sounds like carelessness. And total destruction sounds like fate. I'd rather be the fool than the liar. I lost a third. I kept 2/3. That's the number. The house. I went to a lawyer in Khon Kaen, a good one, an honest one, and she explained it to me over an hour with a lot of patience. There was possibly something I could do. Not ownership, never ownership. But there is a thing called a usufruct, a right to live on land for your lifetime, and it can be registered at the land office. And in some cases, a claim can be made afterwards on the basis of what you paid for. She said, it is not hopeless. She said it would take perhaps 2 years. She said it would cost you, and she named a figure, and she said the outcome was not certain, and she said the husband, Somchai, would have to be brought into it. Somchai, whom I had never met. Who would be sitting in a courtroom in Royet being asked about a house I built for his mother-in-law? And I thought about the file. That's what I kept thinking about. There would be a file, and in that file, somewhere in the disclosure of assets, would be the sale of a house on Neustadt in Bergen, and half of that house was Ingrid's, and her name would be on a piece of paper in a Thai courtroom, next to Knock's name on a chenote. I could not do it. I'm not saying that's rational. It isn't. A better man, a harder man would have fought it and probably got something back. I said no thank you, and I paid her for the hour, and I walked out into the heat, and that was the end of it. The house is still there. Somjit lives in it. She walks up my ramp on her 1.5 feet, and the gradient is 1 in 12, and it will be standing in 80 years. I have made my peace with that, mostly. On the bad days, no. Now. Was it a scam? People want that answer. Terje wanted that answer. The men at the quiz in that Irish pub certainly wanted it, and I know exactly what they said about me after I left, because I'd heard them say it about other men, in that same tone, and I'd nodded along. I'll give you both sides, honestly, and you can decide, because I can't. Here is the case that it was. She knew she was married. She knew from the first week that I was a widower with a house sale in the bank. She never corrected the word divorced. She watched me spend 1.1 million baht building on land that another man had a legal claim to, and she did not say one word. For 2 years, she did not say one word. And when the aunt asked about the house, she was furious in a way that made me trust her, and that fury was very, very useful to her. Here is the case that it wasn't. She refused my money for 4 months and went silent for 2 days when I pushed it. She wept in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning over her mother's foot, and nobody weeps like that on purpose. She said no to the house for 3 weeks. She never once asked me for anything. Not once. In 2 years did that woman ask me for a single baht. Every last thing was my idea, pushed by me, over her objections, because pushing things through against resistance is what I have done for a living since I was 19 years old. And the silence was not a plan. The silence was a woman who could not open her mouth because in her world, opening it meant her mother's shame, her son's name, her village's talk, and a drunk husband 40 kilometers away who would want money in a fight. She was crushed. She chose wrong every day for 2 years. Both. It's both. It's always both. And the reason these stories drive men mad is that we want it to be one. Where I am now. Bergen, 18 months. A rented flat in Moulin-Pries, 6th floor, and the rain comes in sideways off the fjord, and I have never been so glad to be cold in my life. I called Kari. Took me 4 months to do it. She let me finish, and then she said, all right, come for dinner Sunday. That's what she said. Not one word of I told you so. And I have thought about that more than I've thought about the money. I work 3 days a week, marine surveying, hull inspections, tank surveys, condition reports for insurers. I am the oldest man on most of the jobs. I get up at 6. I am on a boat or in a dock at 8 in the morning. And that's it. That's the whole cure. It was never a wife I needed. It was 8 o'clock. I still send money for T-school. 4,000 baht a month. I know what you're going to say. I can hear it. I have heard it. Terje said it. And I don't care. That boy did nothing. He asked me the Norwegian word for a water buffalo out of a bus window. I'll pay for his school until he finishes it. Knock and I don't speak. She sent one message about a year ago. It said, I am sorry every day. That was all. I read it about 40 times and I never answered it. And I don't know if that was strength or cowardice. And I've stopped trying to work out which. So, the lesson. You've been very patient and here it is. I checked the rebar. I want you to hold on to that. I checked the rebar. I checked the cement. I made a man take an entire truckload back. And I stood there in the sun, feeling like the most careful man in Thailand. And the thing that took me apart was a piece of paper in a government office. Free to look at. 30 seconds at a desk. Any Thai lawyer, any translator, any honest friend would have walked into that AMFO with me at month 3 and pulled her house registration and her marriage record. And I would have known everything. And none of the rest of it would have happened. I never went. It never even occurred to me. Because I'd been told the danger was neon, and I'd stayed out of the neon, and I thought that made me safe. Here's what nobody tells you. They warn you about the bar girl. They warn you about the sick buffalo, the gold shop, the boyfriend in the village. Every man in every pub in Thailand will warn you about her. Nobody warns you about the good one. The one with the license on the wall, in the appointment book, and the hands that know what they're doing. Nobody warns you about the woman who genuinely loves you and is also drowning in something she cannot say out loud, in a language you don't speak, for reasons you will never fully understand. And nobody warns you about the real danger, which was never her at all. The real danger was that I was 61 years old, and I needed to be needed. And I would have paid any amount of money to feel like a man who could fix things again. That's what she was selling, if she was selling anything. And I would have bought it at 10 times the price. Verify. Verify before you build, before you buy, before you propose. Take a lawyer. Go to the district office. It is open on Tuesdays and it costs you nothing. And if a woman tells you she doesn't want your money, good. That's good. But it is not the test you think it is. It only means the thing she needs isn't money. That's Björn Halvorsen, 63 now. Bergen, 6 floors up, 3 days a week on the water. I want to leave you with something, and it isn't about knock, because I don't think this story is really about knock. Every man who comes to Thailand at 60 arrives with a defense. He's read the forums. He's heard the jokes. He knows exactly what he's not going to do. And that certainty is the most dangerous thing in his suitcase, because a defense built around one shape only protects you from that shape. Björn built a wall against the bars, and the thing that took him came in through a physiotherapy clinic with a license on the wall, and it wasn't even holding a knife. And on the Thai side, I want you to sit with this too. Prani wasn't a villain. She was a woman with a son, a mother, a failing business, and a legal marriage she'd run from and couldn't afford to end. In a culture where saying the unsayable costs more than most Westerners will ever understand. That's not an excuse. She let a man spend a third of his life savings on land that wasn't safely hers, and she knew. But it's a reason. and a story that gives you a villain when the truth is a reason has cheated you. So here's the practical thing, and then I'll let you go. Before the house, before the sin sod, before the ring, go to the AMFO. Pull the marriage record. Pull the house registration. Take a lawyer you found yourself, not one she recommended. It is boring, it is unromantic, and it takes an afternoon. And if you're 60 and you're watching this at 2 in the morning, and you're not really listening for the warning, you're listening for permission, then hear the one thing Björn actually paid for. The trap was never the neon. The trap was being needed. Take care of yourselves out there. This is Thailand.